None of us are free. None of us are free until we are all free. There are 13 guiding principles and 4 demands: end zero tolerance, implement restorative justice, hire and retain Black teachers, mandate Black history and ethnic studies, and hire more counselors, not cops. Panelists will discuss how we teach and organize for racial justice, especially in the early years. They'll offer stories, examples, and concrete strategies for anti-racist pedagogy and abolitionist practice. They will discuss how to lift Black joy, confront anti-Blackness, and build authentic partnerships to fight for more equitable and just schools.
Thanks, Denisha. All right, we are so excited to jump into conversation today. We are joined by incredible panelists who I admire and I'm so inspired by. So I'm looking forward to just being in community and to learn from y'all tonight. So we're joined by Laleña Garcia, Key Gross, and Makai Kellogg, and we're going to start with a roll call. We're going to have each panelist introduce themselves, share a little bit about who they are and about their work. So Laleña, welcome. We'll start with you.
Great. Thank you, Cierra. Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be in space with these amazing educators. My name is Laleña. When you talk about me, the words that feel good to me are she and her. I teach kindergarten in New York City. I've been working in New York City since 2000 and zero, which makes me feel kind of old, but also, kind of comfortable. I work in private schools mostly. I have never actually taught in a public school. When I finished my master's degree, there was a hiring freeze. And so I have been working in private and charter schools, mostly in independent schools for my entire career. And so when I think about Black Lives Matter at school, there have been times when I am teaching Black Lives Matter at school to really affluent, really wealthy white populations. And so that is some of what I've been thinking about a lot recently. I got involved with Black Lives Matter in school in 2017 when I saw the principles, and I immediately knew that my task was to translate those principles into language that early childhood educators could use in their classrooms. And I have been so honored to work with people in that and to have it grow from a Google Doc that was shared to a coloring book that my friend and I, printed out in Brooklyn and carried around to curriculum for shares. And now we have an actual workbook and a hardcover book with some really beautiful illustrations. And I had the privilege of writing a history of the Black Lives Matter movement and getting to write to children and also their adults about why Black Lives Matter and why these principles, which are so ingrained in early childhood education anyway, are crucial for our children, for our communities, and for our world. And so I'm real thrilled to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Love, love, love those resources. Love the coloring book. So thank you so much. Next, Key, I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
What's up, everybody? My name is Key. I use they, them pronouns. I'm also really excited to be here in space with all of you all. I am a former classroom teacher. I've taught everywhere from in childcare and also in charter schools. So I taught infants, toddlers, 2-year-olds, preschool, and I spent my last 5 years in Harlem in kindergarten. I was also an instructional coach of inquiry-based learning and really did a lot of work around organizing Black Teachers Matter when I used to be in schools. Subsequently kind of shifted my focus when I realized that, some of us had different politics. And so there was a lot more work that needed to be done. I started Woke Kindergarten when I was actually in schools, really as just like a page to be able to share the things that I was making while I was in there. And when the pandemic hit and I had since left schools in 2018, we saw that early childhood infrastructure crumbled, right? Nobody knew what to do because really it's truly the foundation of everything. Capitalism cannot work without it or without us at all. And I noticed that folks were having a hard time figuring out what to do with their kids at home. But at the same time, George Floyd was murdered. So we have this pandemic, George Floyd is murdered, and people don't know how to talk with their kids about Black folks being murdered by the police, especially very young children. And I thought to myself, like, after I had been consulting and like doing creative stuff for a while, I was like, wow, I'm still an educator. Like, I don't need to be in the classroom to still be a teacher. And we're often told that like we're not teachers anymore. And so I thought to myself, well, now I'm free. Now I can do whatever I want. Um, and I really kind of pivoted woke kindergarten in a way that was responsive to both of those catastrophes happening at the same time. And so woke kindergarten's pedagogy really was created in that way. And I started off making like 60-second texts, which are like big concepts for little people in 60 seconds, really text to like anchor really critical conversations. And so I do have a text called Black Lives Matter, which is really about affirming the humanity of multiple children who were murdered by the police, but being able to talk about that in a way that's appropriate for young children, in a way that sustains and preserves their humanity as well. And then made a resource around the word protest because we were seeing all these uprisings happening. And so ultimately, woke kindergarten has become this like abolitionist early childhood ecosystem and visionary creative portal. And I like to say that we support young children and also support the adults, all of you in their lives. I like to call them our little comrades. And basically, moving towards more liberatory futures in learning and really thinking about how we can do that in an anti-carceral way. So that's what I do now with woke kindergarten. And I wish I was still with kids every single day, but I do have like, youth sessions and workshops and all of that. But all of the offerings I put out are free and in service of all children because all of these children are our children. And I'm just happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Key. I've used so many of your resources in my own work as a dance teacher, particularly for creative movement work with young people. So thank you. I appreciate you. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Makai. Welcome.
Hi, good evening. I'm Makai Kellogg. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an early childhood educator and equity and diversity coordinator at School for Friends, which is a Quaker preschool in Washington, D.C. I've been in the early childhood field for 14 years and work primarily with 3 to 5-year-olds. In my equity and diversity role, I lead the Parents of Multiracial Children group and Equity and Diversity Parent Book Club. And I also support and provide training for my colleagues and families on anti-bias education. At my school, I launched the Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action, and I contributed a chapter about that experience in the book Black Lives Matter at School, an Uprising for Educational Justice. I'm an advisory board member for the DC Area Educators for Social Justice, and I co-lead the Anti-Bias Early Childhood Working Group. I love to write, and I have a blog, Makai's Early Childhood Equity Endeavors. And recently, I've been working on a book on empathy and kindness, which I'll share a little bit about more later. I'm a mom. I have a 4.5-year-old and 2 bonus sons, one in college and one is a high school senior. And I'm just so honored to be here with everyone tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Makai. And just to let everybody know, you got to check out Makai's blog. It's so, so good.
Yes, I second that. We shared one of her blogs at Defending the Early Years, and we still get comments every now and people discover it and they love it. And we're really excited about the book that's coming out soon too. So definitely want to plug that later. All right. So so great. I've been fortunate to know all of you guys so much, like Sam, and so it's so great to have you here. So let's get into this conversation. So in light of the backlash, right, that we saw, Key mentioned George Floyd. It was like 2 things happened at the same time. Like George Floyd is murdered. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and every major city in the country took to the streets to protest. And then within 2-3 months later, it was like CRT is racist, right? Like the backlash just came fast, right? It came really fast. And it was a direct response to the racial justice uprisings of 2020. So now, how do you respond when someone asks you why we have to keep lifting the principles and demands of Black Lives Matter, right? I've heard this from teachers in New York City. Isn't it time to move on? Shouldn't we be focusing on something else, right? How do you guys respond? We'll start with Key, then we'll go to Makai, and then Laleña.
Yeah, so when I hear this question, like my first response is like, when Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Because we get the all lives crew coming at us full force, but when Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. I mean, we are witnessing anti-Blackness manifesting on a global scale currently. Like we are witnessing Palestinian children being massacred every single day by the IOF, who trains our police forces here, and our police forces murder Black children. So at the same time, we are witnessing this manifestation of anti-Blackness existing in a very violent space. So like when Black Lives Matter globally, then all lives matter globally. And so people might not be ready to hear that, but that's the truth. And I'm really not the one to come to get anything being soft, because at the end of the day, we see the parallels of what's happening in the street happening in our schools. We're seeing the carcerality of anti-Blackness existing literally within our schools. We're seeing schools literally functioning as prisons. We are witnessing a school-prison nexus. It's not just a pipeline anymore. And so ultimately, like, I think, and I don't want to take up too much space, but for me, it's very simple. When Black children, like my work, like when I remember who it's for, and I remember that my work is for specifically like Black children, Black queer and trans children, Black disabled queer and trans children, then I know my work is for everyone, that no one is excluded, right? And so if we want to actually live in a society where everyone is included, where everyone matters, where everyone's humanity is affirmed and prioritized, then we need to remember that we need to focus and center Black lives and all of that, because by doing that, we center everybody.
Thanks, Key. And focusing more on the school side of things, these policies are being passed that prevent children from learning about their own history, seeing themselves in a book, or even to show up as their authentic selves, and that's not okay. And so to reiterate, we have to keep lifting the guiding principles and demands because they're necessary to change the longstanding institutionalized oppression that the education system in this country has imposed on Black children and children with marginalized identities. And so when educators and families and administrators understand and agree with this, then integrating the guiding principles and demands, like you're saying, Key, they benefit all children.
What everyone has said, really. I remember when the Black Lives Matter at School Steering Committee in New York City read How We Get Free by the Combahee River Collective. And so we're not free until we're all free. And when we center the most vulnerable, that helps everybody. Dignity is not a cup of sugar where we run out. Like this idea that if we are affirming Black lives, if we are affirming Black, queer, and trans and disabled lives, that we're unaffirming anyone else, that's not true. And children know that. Children understand that when we are helping the most vulnerable, everybody gets helped. And that is one reason why I think it's so important to do this work with young children who have yet to fully internalize all of the stories and systems of capitalism and patriarchy and white supremacy and all of the systems of oppression that we have internalized and that we need to unlearn. And when you say to kids, oh, we want to make sure everyone gets what they need, no one says, well, I'm not going to get what I need. That's not how young children respond. And children understand that when things are unfair, they're unfair for everyone. And on some level, that is what Black Lives Matter at School is about, like the affirmative principles. It's not about we don't want, it's about we want. And I think that is so powerful always to emphasize, is that each principle is clear about what we want. We want dignity for everyone. Well, we want our phones to not go off when we're talking. We want everybody to be safe. and to feel seen and loved. And when the most vulnerable people among us feel that way, then we will all feel that way. And so the idea that, oh, Black Lives mattered in 2020 and now we're moving on. No, that's not what's happening. People don't have what they need. So we need to make sure that everyone gets what they need. And it is not, it really is true that when we sent, I'm just repeating myself. I'm repeating what everyone said. When we center the most vulnerable, when we center Black children, then we are uplifting everyone. So I'm going to stop because I'm just saying what everyone else has said.
Wait, can I piggyback on that, Laleña? Because literally, like, Black lives don't stop mattering just because other people get fatigued. Like, we are here. We exist. We're not going anywhere. So I think that's a really great point to make, is like, we're not going to stop mattering just because you're tired of hearing about us. We're still going to be here.
And if you're tired of hearing about us, then stop hurting us, right? If you want, right? It's not hard.
And I just want to add quickly, one of the comments that I heard from a New York City teacher about, we're dealing with the migrant issue, the refugees, right? There are a lot of people coming to New York City. So this teacher, their school is overwhelmed. They have all these new students. And so he's like, why do I need to talk about Black Lives Matter? And I said, let me tell you something. You don't know this. Our migrants and refugee children are the most susceptible to anti-Blackness if we don't address it right now. What is going to happen to them? They are going to learn quickly to position and distance themselves from Black Americans. That's the thing that all immigrants learn, right? And we want them to understand that their struggle is a shared struggle with Black Lives Matter. We understand that, right? And so it's important that, yes, we are experiencing a lot of migrants coming to our country, and that's important, but we need to invest in them to understand that Black Lives Matter is about you too and your situation, and we understand that, right? And we want to support you. It doesn't mean, oh, it doesn't matter, it doesn't appeal to you, right? It doesn't matter to you, right? Because you're not Black or you're dealing with an issue that we think is not related, right? It's all related, it's all connected, right? And I think that's important to remind people when they think, oh, we got to move on, right? There's something else that's happening.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. To all of this, we all have to be free. We all do. And you all started to talk about this a bit, but just diving in a little bit deeper here, how do you talk about the guiding principles of Black Lives Matter at school with children? What does that look like? How have those conversations gone? Because there's so many early childhood, elementary educators, teacher educators, and pre-service teachers on the call right now who are going to tune in that are looking for those resources and the ways that we can have these conversations with young children. So, Laleña, I'll start with you first, and then I'll go to Akiea and then Makai.
I think what I often do is I just say, how many of you have heard the words Black Lives Matter? Do you know what those words mean? And this year, my children were like, nope, no idea. And so I said, great, I'm going to teach you. And they're like, oh, wow. Because that's one great thing about little kids, is they want to learn stuff. And so I said, Black Lives Matter is a movement of people who want to make sure that everybody in our community is safe and seen and loved. And there are some places, and you have learned about times when Black people did not have the same rights as white people. And they all know about Martin Luther King. And then I say, that was not so long ago, but it feels like a long time ago because you were all very small. And right now, there are still times when Black people are not treated the same way. They're all horrified, of course, right? Because it's horrifying. They're like, what? How is that? And so I say, the same way that we have rules in our classroom to make sure that everyone is safe, Black Lives Matter is about having some rules that everybody can think about when they're making their communities so that their communities can be safe. And because we spend a lot of time talking about our community, like, here's our KC community, here's our kindergarten community, here's our school community. What are our responsibilities? And that's something that I think is really important as we talk to children, is that it's not just about, oh, in your community, everybody needs to be safe. What is your responsibility in keeping everyone safe? Because that way they know they have an active role. And it is a thing that I'm thinking so much about as I have a lot of white students, and understanding that everybody has a role in liberation. Everybody has a job. It's not just about some marginalized group having something unfair happen to them and then having to fight back against it. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about making sure proactively that we are all acting in ways that make everyone feel safe. And that can be a little tricky for young children because they are egocentric, but they also, at the same time, have this deeply ingrained sense of justice and fairness. And they also have a lot of compassion. And so, really tapping into that and making sure that everyone knows that they have a role to play and making sure that our community is a safe place where people feel good is something that all of the principles really echo, that that's what they're all about, is making sure that everyone has what they need. And so when I think about talking to young children, I always, bring it back to our classroom. Like, well, what do we do in our classroom to make sure everyone is safe? And how do we take responsibility for our actions? And what are the actions we need to take? And then making it larger. And kids, I will say that even though there are times when I feel really challenged, I have never found that kids just don't get the big ideas, even with kids who are really concrete. And so it's really important to help them start at a young age so they can just really stretch those muscles and use their imaginations, and also really respect what they're saying and trust them, and to give them opportunities to have a voice and have a lot of agency in the classroom, even when it's sometimes I'm like, I don't know, this seems like this is a bonkers idea, but giving them a chance, because they really can take care of themselves and they can take care of each other, and making sure that they know that and that I expect that of them is something that has been really powerful.
I love how Laleña speaks in the way that she speaks with children. I feel like you're such a solid model, like in real time, of how to do that in the way that you have defined the guiding principles. I'm just like, hey, this works for me. I don't want all the jargon. Like, the simpler, the better, because this really is that simple. And I feel like adults complicate things. So just a shout out to you for that. So I'm not in the classroom anymore. So I can speak from, well, kindergarten's perspective, but also I can speak from when I was a classroom teacher and I taught primarily Black children. And so I felt like my work was really about using the principles as my foundation for how we were engaging with every single thing, and how well my kids love themselves and one another. And I always said, like, if my kids left me and they could advocate completely for themselves and each other, then I did what I came to do. If they could sit here and be like, wait a second, no. If they learn how to say no to things that were harmful to them, then I realized I was doing what I was doing. But I think that I like to make things. Like, I really love to make things. I like to bring in things that don't exist. I really love to use visuals a lot. I think using visuals is super cool. So, like, one of the units that I created was called Everyday Heroes versus Superheroes Through the Lens of Black History and Resistance. And I actually started that unit when Black Panther, the original Black Panther, was coming out. So my kids were super hyped, right? They were so excited for Black Panther. And kids think about superheroes all the time. So they think about superheroes having all of these external powers. And so one way that I thought about the principles is like, well, how do they show up as like internal, like intrinsic powers for everyday heroes, right? So we have things like empathy, like we have collective value, we have all of this. And thinking about how we can use what exists to show kids models of this in action and allow them to kind of pull from it, and then kind of define collectively what this means. Have they heard of it before? But my biggest thing is similar to Laleña. I want to gather all of the information from children first. And so I like to use a lot of visuals and things to do that, especially with young children, right? Like, we have like emergent readers. And so like, I love just showing like a picture or video. So like, if you have I think with the principles, I love the coloring book because it has those visuals. I would also expand on that if you have the principles in the classroom, and like, you can literally take photos of kids, of course, that are like engaging in these values, or within the school community, or within the greater community. Or you can start off by showing pictures that actually reflect those values. You can play a game where kids try to match them after you define them. But the idea is to also have a visual entry point into this, so that kids can look at that and kind of discern for themselves what's going on, what's happening. And that kind of leads me to the woke kindergarten side, which is like, I pretty much use visuals in every single thing. And so one of the ways that I like to define words that I think are related to our liberation specifically, that words that allow us to critique our realities, right, and affirm ourselves, which is what the guiding principles do. I have like a woke word of the day. So you can use that format where I usually like, I just made one about ceasefire. I've done one about like strike and protest and all of these things where that is the word. We define it in like a way that Laleña might define it, and then using kind of examples, visual examples, to think and talk about it a little bit more through like 10 different slides, and kind of offering that as something that lives and exists in the classroom as well. And then also have 60-second text. So like the other side of things, these are the things that we want, right? Like the guiding principles tell us what we want, but there are reasons that we want these things, because on the opposite side of things, there are things happening that we don't want. And those are the conversations that I think people have a hard time with. And that's kind of where I thrive, is to think about how can we have these really critical conversations with young children that really center and affirm these guiding principles, but also show why we need to have them and why they're so important. Because I think talking about the why is what we need to kind of lean into a little bit more. And so the 60-second text aspect of things, and like I teach people how to make these, because it's not about just me making them and y'all taking them. It's just about like, how can they also be generative, and what can you make? What can live and exist in your classroom? What do the guiding principles look like in your classroom? Make a 60-second text about it, or a classroom book, and let it live there, right? And so with my text Black Lives Matter, it's showing all of these Black children who were murdered by police, but it doesn't actually mention murder. It says like, I am Trayvon, right? Like I was walking. And so it thinks about the really human things that children were doing. And we don't stay in that conversation. We move towards joy, release, and action. And that's where these principles also come in. See, this is what's happening, and these are the reasons that we have these principles. I'm gonna clip it so that so that Makai can go.
Oh my goodness, coming after both of y'all. But I guess it works in the sense that my school, some years more predominantly white than others in terms of racial diversity. I know you both shared the populations you work with. But also I work with, my school has very young children. So we start at 12 months and we go up to 5 years. And so at my school, we use what children are already familiar with and real examples they can connect to. The guiding principles, like, which is so awesome, Laleña, like they serve as like building blocks on each other. So like in order to have collective value, there needs to be some loving engagement and empathy also. And so having such young children at the school at 12 months, like it allows me to witness the progression of how children really get the guiding principles, even in the younger classes. And so with the toddlers, there are just so many caring interactions that the children experience and then demonstrate with each other. The teachers do a lot of modeling, so like naming feelings, and they also set up the environment to make it safe and home-like. The teachers support children in developing language and positive self-concept. And so using the guiding principles along with like tangible connections, like, for example, they practice using scripts, like, what do you need to feel better? And then they might hand someone an ice pack or a family photo. Also, the toddler and the older children, we call like the pre-K mixed age cohort, they use baby dolls. And the children demonstrate loving engagement. They make connections to the interactions with their own families and caregivers, and also show empathy to the baby dolls. And I'm a big puppet person, and puppets are used with both the toddlers and our pre-K group, and they act out various scenarios that connect with the guiding principles, and also utilize the guiding principles when problem solving, whatever the situation is. As the older children start like sharing observations about the world around them. So they share what they notice about skin color, disability, exclusion, gender, etc. And so what we do as the educators, we take these observations and we plan opportunities to dive into these topics, using the children's literature that we have available, and also create hands-on experiences. So for example, you know, we create self-portraits while focusing on racial identity, or we build accessible structures in the block area, or we dress up like Julian from Julian is a Mermaid in dramatic play. And we're also like learning phrases in a student's language. And so there's so many possibilities for conversations and curriculum. So thank you a million times over, Laleña, for creating this, and also Key for sharing the important work that you do as well.
Oh, there's just so much. I just want to just keep talking with you guys all day. There's just so much you were saying there, but we're going to keep going because we have a couple more questions. If you haven't already, though, please feel free to drop a question in the Q&A function. We do have time later for some questions. There's a couple really good ones in there. We might have to combine some and figure it out, but that is where you can submit your question for any of the panelists or all of the panelists. All right, so as we mentioned, our focus this year for the Week of Action is collective value. So this is a very long question, but it's really important. So what does collective value mean and look like to you? How can we teach and organize for collective value in our classrooms and community? And how can we build authentic, loving, and liberatory partnerships with families and communities, right, to center collective value? And so, again, thinking about that, one of you, I think Laleña said, we start with our classroom and then the kindergarten community, then, right, that's how we help young children think, right? We start in the inner and move out in these circles. And it's the same thing with collective value, right? Thinking in those parts. So again, what does it mean to you? How do we teach and organize for collective value in our classrooms? And how can we build authentic, loving, and liberatory partnerships with families and communities to center collective value? We'll start with Makai, then Laleña, and then Key.
Okay, so collective value to me is caring connections, shared power, welcoming all emotions, respecting all identities, and listening to each other. Collective value is what educators, students, and families should experience in schools and society at large. So young children are learning what keeps them safe and what makes them happy. And at the same time, they're noticing the needs of others. Classrooms can be spaces where children are respected as people who have input, and where families aren't judged, but welcomed into the classroom to build understanding. And in terms of teaching and organizing, start with how classroom rules and agreements are created. Collective value can be the anchor, and then the children can describe what that looks like for them. And teachers can rethink punitive discipline models that reinforce carceral logic and instead engage in restorative justice. Some examples of how I've explored collective value with my students include consent. How do we differentiate between rough play and fighting? Reading books like Yes, No, A First Conversation About Consent, or Don't Touch My Hair. Practicing asking for consent with puppets. In terms of accessibility, we tour our school building and look for ways that our building is accessible. So whether it's like Braille on signs, ramps, or our elevator. And then I also use it, because it's a big pet peeve of mine, but I use it as a chance to explain why the automatic door button should only be used by people who need it. Because when the kids just push it all the time, then it breaks. And so we discuss how that's unfair and what can be done about that. With families, they're welcomed into the classroom for Family of the Week, story time, sharing how they celebrate a holiday, or any occasion, because families support anti-bias curriculum. We recently had a school-wide service project led by a parent to collect children's clothing to donate to a local organization, Martha's Table. Families are welcome to equity and diversity programming, such as book club, where they have the opportunity to do the work so that they can be better for their children, do better for their children. So for example, this year we're reading Michelle Good's Five Little Indians, which is about residential boarding schools. And many of us were never taught about that growing up. And so they're doing their work. And so overall, intentionally engaging with families builds those authentic, trusting, and loving partnerships.
Wow. I'm really inspired. Thank you. So, what does collective value mean to me? I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of the national prompt about collective liberation. Um, and I've been really loving that phrase. And to me, it kind of means, like, until we're all free, ain't none of us free, really. And just that way that our liberation is bound up with each other, and the importance of solidarity work and the importance of being co-conspirators. Um, and this year, I did a new thing with my class. So we talked about the idea that injustice to one is injustice to all. And I gave a hypothetical because I was like, "Can you all get this idea?" And they're like, bring us some like real specifics." And so I said, I got this kid's permission to use them as an example. And I said, well, what if I said this one kid couldn't use the materials in our class, but everyone else can? And they're like, that's not fair. And I was like, well, why? Like, you can use it. Why do you care about this other kid? And they were really clear that they did not like it. So, like, first of all, they're like, no, not okay. And then I was like, well, tell me why. And they were able to say, and one kid said, well, he's part of our community, so he has a right to use the things in our class. And I was like, yeah, we are doing this. And then I said, well, what would you say to me? And that was where they got stuck. And it was interesting watching them say, well, I'd say, well, Laleña, maybe that's not fair. Or I'd say, Laleña, maybe that kid will feel sad. And so I asked them, I said, friends, I see that you really know how you feel, and you're really clear that you don't like it, you feel sad for this kid, and you think I should change. But I notice it's also hard for you to think about what you want to say to me. Why do you think that is? And then, because kids really can get to things, one of the kids said, well, maybe we're afraid that you'll say, well, I'm the teacher and I'm in charge, so I can do whatever I want. And I said, yeah, it takes a lot of courage to speak up when somebody else is in charge. And they were like, uh-huh. And I said, well, what do you think we should do? And one kid said, well, maybe if we all told you, then you would have to listen to us. And I, inside my head, did a little dance, because that exactly, right? Like, we all have to have all of our voices, even when something is not affecting us, because they're like, no, that doesn't actually feel okay. It's not fair. And I think if we can help people understand that our liberation is bound up in each other, and that oppression hurts all of us, because I think as adults, there's this idea that, patriarchy hurts women, and homophobia hurts queer people, and white supremacy hurts Black people. But all of those things hurt everyone. It is not good for your soul to oppress other people. It hurts you too. And I think that some people are really starting to get there, but it's a big lump, because, people have worked really hard to make sure we don't know that. Because people with power spend a lot of time making sure that everyone else is fighting over the scraps, and it's a zero-sum game, and trying to pit people against each other. And we see that when there's coalition building, that is when the people in power get frightened. This is not a thing I would say to young children, but a thing I have noticed is that is when people are assassinated. That is when the powers that be are like, oh, no, 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 you can't do that. But that is because that is what works. And I think that it's so important for us to help children know that at a young age. And I'm thinking that especially because I'm teaching some people who are going to grow up and probably have a lot of money and power. Like, I really think that the white boys in my class are going to grow up, and if they don't have an understanding of their responsibility to other humans, then I have not done my job. And I will say that one thing that is funny that has happened in my class, that is not always my favorite, but it means I feel like I'm doing the right job, is that kids will sometimes overhear something and say, Laleña, you did this thing to this other kid, and this is why I don't like it. And I'm really glad that they tell me that. Sometimes they don't have all the information, right? Like, oh, friend, I could tell that kid to do this thing because, they need to actually have this situation because of something that you don't know. But I do feel really good that the kids in my class have learned that I respect them and that I take into account what they say, because speaking up to people in authority is scary. And so what I try to do is, even when I'm like, friend, that you do not have information, this is actually kind of irritating, I'm trying to get us all out of the room, is I always try to say, thank you for noticing that. I see that this is what you're doing. Also, here's some information that you don't have, or all of those things. But I want to acknowledge them, is that when they say, if they can tell me they don't like something I'm doing, and I'm the kindergarten teacher, like I have a lot of power, then they have learned how to advocate for themselves, and they're advocating for others, the way that Q was saying. And that when we teach kids that I think is one of the most powerful things that we can do, because when people can advocate for themselves and others, like that is when we have movements that can't be stopped.
It's like, should I even say anything? Like, Makai and Laleña just, y'all really ate that for real. Okay, so, all right, ADHD, I have to look at the question. All right. So for me, collective value ultimately means like we keep us safe. Like we keep us safe. It means we're really all we got. We all have different things to contribute. We all have various skills to contribute. All of our humanity matters, right? That we're celebrating our humanity. There's no throwaway person. We're not thinking about throwing people away. That's where we get into the abolitionist perspective of like, hey, like we are people who may cause harm, but we are not going to label ourselves as just harmful people. We need to figure out what it means to work together collectively and to understand one another's values so much that we can sit and figure out ways to repair that harm. Ultimately, it also means for me that like these hierarchies that exist between like the adult children, this is why I refer to children as our comrades, because in my mind, I look to the kids to really figure out how we gonna create the futures that we want. Because guess what? We might not even be here. We might not even be here to witness what we want to be able to see. We want our kids to be able to live in a world free of this violence, free of carceral violence and state violence, imperialist violence. But we might not be able to see it. So I think about kids as comrades, thinking about them as like co-architects of the futures that we want to build. And that can look different ways in the classroom, and I'll get to that. I also think about how animals are our comrades. I think about how the earth is our comrade. Like all of these things that when we think about collective value, we're thinking about all of it, coexisting with all of it. How do we care for one another? How do we care for animals? How do we care for the earth? How do animals care for us? How does the earth care for us? And that leans into to thinking about your classroom as an ecosystem and what that means really to show mutual respect. How does our classroom care for us, and how do we care for our classroom? I'm thinking about collective value. I think a lot about how eradicating those hierarchies can look. And so I'll speak a little bit to like what that might look like in the classroom. Thinking with kids about how we all have roles in our liberation. So like one thing that I do with folks is the social change ecosystem that Deepa Iyer and Building Movement dropped in 2020 was really cool for adults to consider. How are we kind of moving, like how are we participating in social change, right? Because a lot of people like me, for example, were immunocompromised. And so you can't be at every protest because literally we didn't understand what this killer virus was doing. And, you know, there's so many people that are still dying from COVID. So thinking about like also how sometimes in organizing spaces, people get shamed for not doing certain things. So reminding kids, and that's I think, core tenet too of disability justice as well, is to think about how we all contribute in different ways. And so what I like to do is I like to remix those roles to think about who children are. And I give kids an opportunity to tell us who they are through those roles. And so that's one way to kind of consider having kids be at the forefront of like, wait a second, I got all these gifts and skills and all of that. And so thinking about like, in the morning, for example, like if I do like an opening circle, because I'm going to ground it similar to Laleña, similar to Makai, like in what I might do in the classroom. If I'm thinking about how we've co-created our like agreements, right, in our classroom, I used to do affirmations with kids in the morning, both individual and collective. So what are individual affirmations looking like for us? What are collective affirmations looking like for us? But also grounded in our kind of collective values and the agreements that we decided exist with one another. And thinking about those affirmations later on in the day. So at like a closing circle, doing shout outs and apologies, really to reflect on, oh, like, was I really with it? Like my affirmation, like this is what I said, like, did I do what I said? Or is there somebody that I need to apologize to? And that looked like teachers apologizing to kids, teachers apologizing to teachers, kids apologizing to each other, but also in this space of consent, right? Because collective value means I also honor the fact that you might not be ready for this apology, right? Like, and you can thank you for giving it to me, but I don't have to accept it yet because I still feel hurt. And so remembering that, again, our humanity doesn't go away. We're allowed to feel everything. So collective value to me also means we are feelers who are going to feel things, and we need to make sure that we have space for that. So thinking a lot about how you can reconnect what you're doing throughout the day. It also means kind of setting up opportunities for kids to like when I tell y'all, by mid-year, I didn't really have to do nothing for real. Like the kids was running everything. Like when kids needed support, and it can often look like them coming to teachers all the time. But we had set up this like chill spot in the classroom where kids learn how to kind of self-regulate on their own. Like it was a non-punitive space that was super comfortable with, sensory oriented things and silly books and big sand timers. And so like, if you needed to get there, I don't care if you rolled, skipped, hopped, cartwheeled, cursed me out. I don't care how you got there. Just get there, baby. Just get there. It ultimately turned into kids taking each other there and soothing each other there. So by that time, it was like, can I do this with this person? In the morning, when you're thinking about morning message, we often write it. Give kids a chance to write it and pair kids together that might need a little bit more support. So where are there opportunities for peer-to-peer learning in action? Right? Because we have kids that get singled out in schools all the time because this child may need more support reading, and kids become numbers and kids become leveled text and all of these things. But if you pair kids really intentionally, they're working together to do this. And so ultimately, I never really had to do morning message. My kids was doing it. There's also a way to consider, how are you inviting kids into the space? How are you inviting families into the space? At the beginning of every year, we used to ask families, what are your hopes and dreams for your child? To think about grounding that type of collective value, your hopes and dreams, because a lot of parents get stuck on, I want my child to read, write, boom, boom, boom. But like, what are your hopes and dreams? And not only asking the families, but asking the kids too. And then giving an opportunity for the families to hear what their kids were saying and for the kids to hear what their families were saying and to check in on that at the end of the year. So really kind of grounding this in like the very humane aspects of things that get missed sometimes in schools. I'm missing if I'm missing anything. The last thing I will say is also thinking about if you know how people have questions of the day sometimes. I like to do wonderings. So how do we wonder about the world that we want to create? What are we wondering about in our classroom? Could we potentially wonder about some type of harm that was caused before and ground the wondering in the repair, ground the wondering in the freedom dream that we have? And the wondering can be anything, right? And so thinking about how you can have something like that kind of wondering of the day. And also you can have families participate in that as well. I'm gonna stop rapping because I keep going.
You gave me a great idea to do with my kids' wonderings, right? Have them, what are you wondering about? Like I make these poor kids tell me stories for rides to school. So now I'm like, how can I bring in wondering? So thank you. That is really awesome.
Yes, I'm taking so many notes from everything that you all have shared. You've been so generous with your time, with your resources. And speaking of resources, what are some additional resources that you'd like to share with the community? I know in the Q&A, some folks are just so hungry for those resources. So is there anything that we haven't talked about tonight that you just want to lift up in this space? Any resources? Key, I'll go to you first, and then I'll go to Makai and then Laleña.
Lately I've been making a lot of zines. And so issue.com/woke kindergarten has a bunch of zines. My website has all of the things that I've talked about and more, like read alouds and things like that. That's wokekindergarten.org. And then The YouTube has a bunch of read alouds and 60-second texts. And then on our Patreon, I'm about to start working groups again, because I find that like once I release something, it's been really cool to be able to kind of work through those and like collectively plan together. And also whenever I like make a zine, for example, or something, I'll put the PDF on the Patreon. So I'll leave it.
First, I want to shout out a few other resources, and then I'll get to my own. If you have not started reading the first conversation series, I highly, highly recommend. Big shout out to Megan Madison and the team. The We Are Little Feminist collection is lovely for toddlers and even older children. They have beautiful photographs of real people, and it's not too much text on each page. And socialjusticebooks.org has tons of book lists, and even some specific to Black Lives Matter at school. And so I mentioned earlier that I co-authored a book with 3 colleagues. The title is Reflection, Perspective Taking, and Social Justice, Stories of Empathy and Kindness in the Early Childhood Classroom. And the focus of my chapter is empathy as a foundational Black Lives Matter guiding principle. And I share how I use the book Miss Tizzy with my students to not only center empathy, but also so many other guiding principles, including collective value. And so if you're interested, it is available for pre-order on Red Leaf Press.
I also really love the First Conversations books. They've been really helpful for me. I just dropped in the chat the Haymarket video that people might have seen. It's a couple years old, but it's with Dina Simmons and Goldie Muhammad and Bettina Love, and it's about abolition education. And I just, every time I watch it, it just helps me just think more deeply. I will also say that Black Lives Matter at School has a new guide that is so amazing. And that's been really helpful. And so I feel like that's just like, those are just some resources that people should look at and go through. Those are things that have always helped me in my work. And, you know, as people are like, but Laleña, you've been teaching Black Lives Matter in school for so long, and you like even wrote a book about it. And I'm like, yeah, and I'm still changing my lesson plans and doing stuff because things change. And as teachers, you know, it can be really isolating. That's one of the reasons why I love conversations like this. So I can just be in community with people who are also doing this kind of work, and for us to hear ideas from each other. And I mean, I just took a million notes while Key was talking. I was like, I'm gonna do all these things in my classroom tomorrow, or maybe not tomorrow, but just so that we can think together and create together, and then also be responsive to our students. You know, we have different kids every year. And every year kids come in with different understandings, with different needs. We might be in a new school. And so just going back to some of these things has been really helpful for me, just to kind of reground myself.
Can I add a couple?
Yes, yes.
I didn't want to talk too much, but there's this podcast. I don't know if they've continued it, but it's called Goodnight Black Child. I really, really, really love that podcast so much. It's so sweet. I also Lessons in Liberation. That text is really dope. Project Nia Sunset is Mariam Kaba's org. They sunset, but they have so many resources, like so many zines. I mean, like on restorative justice, transformative justice. I mean, it's absurd. And they also had something called Queenie's Crew that was really dope. So look into Project Nia. All of that's online for free. They also have an issue site like issue.com, I think, / Project Nia. Those are really dope. So wanted to add.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Hopefully you guys have seen all the resources in here. We'll definitely share many more. I'll drop a doc that has some resources too that we at Defending in the Early Years created to promote Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action. So lots of resources, lots of questions too, but we only got time for one. So first I'm gonna get the short one out of the way. They want to know, do y'all do PD? The answer is yes. I know Laleña does. I know Key does. I know I do. I know Makai might. I don't know if she does, but she should. So yeah, so please please, Key, Laleña, Makai, drop whatever contact information you want in the chat to everyone so that people can contact you directly about professional development opportunities. Please share that. So the other questions, there's a lot. It's so hard to pick one, y'all. There's so many, but I think what I'm seeing, and I guess I'll ask this question because I think it's important. I think what people are asking is thinking about how do you do this work? And Lenny, you spoke about this a little bit with the powerful white boys in your classroom, but like there are a few questions about doing this work with non-Black children, right? How do you engage them with this in a way that's not tokenizing, in a way that uplifts Black voices, in a way that really is collective value for them and doesn't cause harm to the Black students in the class, right? If they may say or do something, right? How do you do that? I think is one question that a lot of people have on their minds. Laleña, why don't you start? Because the first question was directed towards you, I know, but they actually wrote your name, and then, but I'm combining that with a couple other questions, so we'll let you.
You spell my name right, then you definitely get some extra points. So I think that I definitely want to start with our community. Like before I even mention Black Lives Matter, right? Like we have to have a safe and caring community first before we do anything that might just open up harm, right? Because I don't want my 3 Black kids to suddenly have, like, I don't want to be that person who makes kids feel like I felt when I was in predominantly white institutions, right? So that's not what I want. And when you have a caring classroom community, then there's a lot of other things you can do because kids have understandings about how we treat each other. So there isn't a like, well, let's all look at this person. And I will also say that because I'm a Black woman and I identify as a Black woman, that also makes it safer for a lot of kids. And it means that kids can also direct questions at me and not children. So that is a conundrum that I don't have like a great cookie cutter answer for it. Like there really is that like we have to create the space, which is not about a lesson plan. It is about how we be in some ways. Like how are we? And what are we bringing and what kind of respect are we showing the people of color that are in our spaces? Are we noticing that maybe the only people of color in our spaces are the people who are cleaning up after us? How do we leave our classrooms for those people? How do we talk about that? That is something that is real. And so I think that's a really important, is that how is our classroom? What's this container of safety that we've created? And then again, thinking about, do you want things to be unfair? Young children don't. And I think that is a really important question. It's like, it doesn't feel good when you watch something be unfair. And you can see this in young children, is that like when you watch really young kids, if a kid gets hurt, other kids, look at them with concern. They go to help them. Like there are all these studies that show very young children comforting other children. And so really tapping into that and saying, well, we have a job. Our job is not just to like not hurt other people. Our job is to keep other people safe. Like going back to that responsibility that we have. So it's an action. It's not just a passive, don't hurt people, because that's not enough. Because if we just have all the white people in the world just suddenly being nice, guess what? Racism still exists. We are still going to be harmed. So we have to actively work for making sure that things are fair. So I hope that is like a good, short, quick answer.
I have a quick thing to add.
Please.
So a very tangible thing to do is, how like, especially in early childhood, sometimes we'll start units. It's like, who am I? And it's rooted in this question. And like, of course, that question can come up throughout our entire lives because it shifts and changes. But I like to start with rooting it in who I am and who we are. And so thinking about this idea of who I am brings an opportunity for kids to think about who literally, like, what are you bringing to the space? Who are you? We want to get to know all of you. And then moving towards the who we are, that collective of really creating, that goes back to what Laleña was saying. And that's what I wanted to add is, here's one way to kind of help create that classroom culture that can get us to be able to have those conversations of like, who are we? And using those guiding principles to kind of guide us and think about our shared values, thinking about if we know who we are, like culturally, thinking about culture, and then going towards the who we are, like what is the culture of our classroom, and moving towards that. That's one way to kind of tangibly ground this work.
I love that. And it's so important. It's really it's the modeling, it's the setting up the space where kids feel like they can be in this relationship with you and each other right? And that safety is so important. Makai, please.
Sure. So I guess I'll add more on the curriculum-y side of things. And so, more recently, we had Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and Ijuma Jordan has written really well about this. But, we have parents like, oh, are you going to talk about Dr. King? And I'm like, wait, hold on. Like, first, there's some scaffolding that is necessary, right? Like prior to. So I explained to a parent, I said, well, first we might read like all the colors we are, and like even first understand like, why do we have skin color? What is it for? What does it do, etc. And then maybe go into our skin, which introduces like racism and the history of that and what that looks like. And then, then we work our way. But after that foundational piece that Laleña and Key just shared, it takes, time and effort before getting to like the deeper things.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, that we don't want to people think we just got to jump into the harshness with young children, and they don't want that. And that sends a message about how we view this stuff, if that's what we're starting with, right? But how do we start with the love, the who we are, what we bring to the table, the who we want to be, right? And how we want to live. And yeah, it's super important. Thank you. I know there's some others, but that's what we're going to get to right now.
Yeah, I wish that we could just sit and chat all day, because I have just enjoyed this conversation so much, and I'm leaving with so many tangible resources, ideas, but also just inspiration to continue to do the work. And so thank you, thank you, thank you to our panelists, to Laleña, to Key, to Makai, for sharing resources, for sharing your expertise, for sharing your ideas. We're just so grateful that you created time and space to be in community with us today. Thank you to my co-moderator, Denisha. I appreciate you and your partnership in this collaboration. Thank you to the ASL interpreters, Shannon and Crystal, for joining us. We always appreciate having you with us. Thank you to the Black Lives Matter at School crew, who are working behind the scenes on the tech and just are so supportive, of course, during this week and all year long. And thank you to all of you, to the attendees, for joining us for this important conversation. We are celebrating Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action, so participate in a Week of Action event or learn more about some of the last-minute participation opportunities that we have if you're just getting started. You can learn more about Black Lives Matter at School, our Week of Action, the Year of Purpose, and the Lifetime of Practice. And just so you all know, we will follow up with all of the resources that we shared tonight that are happening in the chat that the panelists have shared in an email. And then please fill out our feedback survey. We'd love to hear from you so that we can continue to offer these spaces to come together and be in conversation. And so as we prepare to close, Key reminded us that we all need to be free, that we keep us safe. Laleña reminded us that our collective liberation is bound up in each other. And Makai reminded us that we have to practice collective value every day in our interactions with each other and with children. Thank you all so, so much. Looking forward to being together in a virtual space soon. We appreciate you.
And just a quick shout out. Thank you, Cierra, and thank you, Rethinking Schools, for organizing this. You guys are amazing to work with. Love it, love it, love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.